I got the wedding invitation 9 days before the ceremony, and even then, it came from a print shop instead of my daughter's own hand. "You're welcome to come, Dad, but keep it low-key." That was the text underneath it. Before I tell you what happened when I showed up anyway, and who ended up leaving the building with me, let me know in the comments what city you're watching from tonight. And if you believe a father's patience has a bottom, hit that subscribe button before we start. My name is Walter Pruitt. I'm 68 years old, and for the last 22 years, I raised my daughter Casey by myself in a two-bedroom house outside Tulsa, Oklahoma. After her mother, my wife Diane, died of ovarian cancer when Casey was 11. I worked the same job the whole time, running a fleet maintenance yard, the kind of place where the men come in stinking of diesel and the coffee's been sitting since 5 in the morning. I never remarried. I never really tried. Casey was the reason I got up every day, and I told myself that if I did this one thing right, raised one good, kind, grounded person, my life would count for something. Sitting in the third row of a rented banquet hall outside Dallas, watching my daughter's rehearsal dinner unfold under gold string lights I didn't recognize the name of, I understood I had failed at that one thing completely. I had raised a stranger. The room was the kind of pretty that cost real money. Round tables draped in ivory linen, a live guitarist plucking something soft near the bar. I sat off to the side in my one good sport coat, navy blue, bought for Diane's funeral and worn maybe 4 times since, next to a coworker's retirement party, a hospital visit, and now this. It still fit fine. I kept it pressed. But next to the tailored jackets and the little black dresses in that room, I might as well have worn my work coveralls. Across the room, Casey sat beside her fiancé, Braden Cole, and his mother, a real estate broker named Pamela, who talked with her hands like she was conducting an orchestra only she could hear. Casey laughed at something Pamela said, tilting her head back the exact way her mother used to, and for a second my chest hurt so bad I had to look down at my plate. Then I heard her voice carry over the guitar. "I keep telling him, we cannot let my dad get near the photographer," Casey said, swirling her wine. "He'll show up in that same ugly brown coat he wears to everything. It's fine for him, I guess, but I don't need it in every picture from the best day of my life." The women at her table laughed, soft and easy. The kind of laugh that isn't cruel exactly, just careless. The kind you only give when you've forgotten someone can hear you. I looked at my hands on the tablecloth. I thought about the 14 years I drove her to swim practice at 5:30 in the morning before my own shift started. I thought about the year after Diane passed when Casey stopped eating, and I sat outside her door every night just so she'd know somebody was there. I said nothing. I picked up my water glass and drank. What Casey didn't know, what I had never told her because I never saw the point of bragging about grief, was that the small life insurance payout after Diane died, combined with the fleet yard, had turned into something else entirely over the years. I had bought the land under 3 trucking depots when nobody else wanted it. I had quietly picked up a controlling stake in a regional logistics company when it was on its knees during the recession, the same company, as it happened, that now owned this very banquet hall as an event space for corporate functions and rented it out to families like Braden's for weekends like this one. I didn't run the business day to day anymore. I let good people run it. But every lease, every staff contract, every dollar that moved through that building still crossed my desk once a year for signature. I never told Casey because I didn't want her chasing me for what I had instead of who I was. Looking back, from that folding chair in the corner, I understood the price of that silence had just come due. After dinner wrapped up, Braden caught my eye and waved me toward the hallway outside the ballroom, past a rack of coat hangers and a folding table stacked with seating cards. For one foolish second, walking toward him, I let myself hope he wanted to thank me. 2 months earlier, when Casey called in tears saying the deposit for the venue had fallen through because Braden's contracting business had a rough quarter, I'd wired $11,000 the next morning without a single question, and told her to let Braden save face with his own family by saying it came from savings on his end. I thought I was being generous. I hadn't understood yet that I was buying myself a front row seat to my own humiliation. "Walter," Braden said, glancing over his shoulder like he was checking for witnesses. "Listen, we've got a situation." "What kind of situation?" "The band we booked bailed this week. Total nightmare. Pam found us a replacement, but they want $4,000 up front by Friday or they're gone too." He rubbed the back of his neck. "I know you already did a lot, but this is Casey's wedding. It's the only one she gets." I studied his face for a long moment, looking for the young man Casey used to talk about with stars in her eyes, back when he still opened doors and asked about my week. I didn't find him. You're asking me for 4,000 more, I said. After I covered the deposit, you told everyone your business paid. Braden's jaw tightened. Come on, man. You live in that same little house. You drive a truck older than some of our guests. What are you even saving it for? I'm not giving you another dime tonight, Braden, I said, keeping my voice level. You need to learn how to build something with what you have. Something shifted behind his eyes, the last trace of nerves burning off into something colder. You know, Pam said you'd probably get like this, he said. She said guys your age get weird and controlling about money once they retire, like it's the only power you've got left. Keep your 4 grand, old man. Casey and I will figure it out ourselves. Just do us both a favor tomorrow and try to blend in. He walked back toward the ballroom without waiting for a response, and I stood alone in that hallway with the smell of catering trays drifting out from the kitchen doors, feeling something in my chest go quiet and still, the way a lake goes still right before a storm crosses it. I needed air that didn't smell like candle wax and perfume, so I pushed through a service door I wasn't supposed to use and found myself in the catering kitchen, all steel counters and shouting and the good, honest chaos of people doing real work. A young man in chef's whites spotted me first and froze mid-stride. Mr. Pruitt, he said, wiping his palms on his apron, like he was meeting the governor. Sir, is everything all right? Can I get you anything? Just needed to breathe, Marcus, I said. Food smells wonderful. Carry on. He nodded, and the kitchen resumed its rhythm. And I stood there a moment, remembering the second thing Braden and Casey's whole world didn't know. 20 years ago, when the yard was barely breaking even, I'd taken a chance on a warehouse full of loading docks nobody wanted and built it, brick by brick and contract by contract, into Pruitt Regional Logistics, the company whose name was on the lease for the very building I was standing in. I didn't just attend events here. My company owned the events business. I was still catching my breath by the walk-in cooler when the kitchen door banged open and Pamela stormed in, dragging a young server by the sleeve of her uniform. This is not what I ordered, Pamela snapped, holding up a plate like it had personally insulted her. I asked for the salmon without the sauce. Do you people not understand basic instructions? Do you have any idea what my son's future in-laws are paying for this weekend? The girl, no older than 19, stammered an apology, her eyes glassy. Pamela shoved the plate back into her hands hard enough to slosh sauce onto the girl's sleeve, then turned on her heel and marched back out without another word. Marcus looked at me, pale, knowing full well I'd watched the whole thing. I didn't say anything. I just nodded once, like I was filing it away because I was. I walked out the back door into the cool Texas night and understood, with total clarity, exactly what kind of family I was about to be handed over to. The wedding morning came in bright and warm. I got to the venue early and sat in the lobby in my navy jacket, freshly pressed. My good shoes shined the night before out of habit more than hope. Casey came out of the bridal suite in her robe, hair half done, phone pressed to her ear, and when she saw me waiting there, her face did something complicated, somewhere between guilt and irritation before settling on irritation. Dad, we need to talk about seating, she said, hanging up. Pam thinks it'll look better if you're further back, just for photos. Like row 6 or 7. It's not a big deal. Fathers usually sit up front, Casey. Not when they show up looking like they walked in off a job site, she said, and I watched some of Diane's warmth curdle into something sharper in her daughter's mouth. Braden told me you wouldn't help with the band. If you're going to be difficult about money, you can be difficult from the back. I looked at this young woman I had raised alone, who I had rocked to sleep the year her mother died, and felt the hurt in my chest finally give way to something calmer, something almost peaceful. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a plain white envelope, the kind you'd use to mail a bill, and held it toward her. Her eyes lit at the sight of it, assuming, I imagine, that it held the $4,000 Braden had asked for. She snatched it, already smiling. Knew you'd come around, she said. Sit in the back, Dad. Try not to embarrass us. Enjoy your wedding, Casey, I said, and walked toward the ballroom, leaving her holding an envelope that contained no cash at all, just a voided check and a note in my own handwriting that said, "Respect isn't rented, it's earned." She wouldn't open it until later. By then it wouldn't matter what it said. What mattered was what was already in motion. The reception that evening was the kind of excess that makes you forget people are starving 3 miles away. String lights overhead, A 10-piece band playing songs I half recognized, towers of white peonies on every table. I was seated at table 16, tucked against the kitchen doors, surrounded by distant cousins of Pamela's who spent the whole meal discussing real estate prices in Frisco and never once asked my name. That suited me. I ate my chicken slowly and watched my daughter dance under lights I helped pay for, in a building I owned, wearing a dress purchased with money I'd wired without asking for thanks. Somewhere in the second hour, the band slowed into something gentle, and I saw Casey crossing the floor toward my table, the white envelope crushed in her fist, torn open at the top. Her smile for the guests around her stayed fixed and bright right up until she reached me, and then it dropped like a mask coming off. She leaned down close enough that only I could hear her over the music. "What is this supposed to be?" she hissed. "Some kind of message? Braden said you'd probably pull something like this. He said your mind's been slipping, that you get weird and stingy since you retired." I didn't want to believe him. "I'm not slipping, Casey," I said quietly. "I'm seeing clearly for the first time in a while." "You embarrassed yourself tonight," she said, straightening up, voice climbing just enough that the cousins at my table went quiet and started listening. "Look at you. Same coat, same shoes, sitting back here like the help." Braden's mother has been asking why my own father looks like he wandered in from the parking lot. "Do you have any idea how that reflects on me?" "I gave you $11,000 2 months ago, Casey," I said, my voice never rising. "And your fiancé told his whole family he paid for it himself." Her face flushed. "That's not the point. The point is you're humiliating me at my own wedding." I thought of Diane, of the year I spent teaching this same girl to ride a bike in the church parking lot because I was too proud to hire someone, of every birthday I never let pass without a homemade cake, even when I was too exhausted to stand. I said none of it out loud. There wasn't room left in her for it. "You're right about one thing," I said finally, standing up slowly, straightening my jacket. "I don't belong at this table." Her smile came back, triumphant, thinking she'd won. "Glad you understand," she said. "Now leave. Get out, and don't come back because you are not welcome here." I gave her one last gentle nod. "Okay," I said, "but I'll take some others with me." I turned my back on her and walked, not toward the exit doors at the front where she was pointing, but straight toward the kitchen, because the real ceremony of the evening was about to start, and I was the one holding the baton. I pushed through the swinging doors into the bright fluorescent chaos of the kitchen, where the general manager of the venue, a steady, gray-haired man named Richard Ellery, who'd worked for Pruitt Regional for 11 years, spotted me and immediately stepped out from behind the prep line. "Mr. Pruitt," he said, wiping his hands, "everything all right out there?" "The bride and groom have just informed me I'm not welcome at this event any longer, Richard," I said. "I intend to honor that request to the letter. I want a full and immediate stop to all services for this booking." Richard didn't blink. "Understood, sir. Your call on staff wages? Full pay for the whole weekend. Nobody loses a cent over my family's business. But shut it down. Music, food, bar, all of it." He nodded once, pulled his radio off his belt, and said into it, calm as a man reading a grocery list, "All staff, this is Richard. Full stop on the Cole Pruitt reception. Step away from your stations. We are shutting down the floor." I walked back out onto the edge of the dance floor and waited. The band was mid-song, guests spinning under the lights, nobody noticing anything yet. I raised my hand and snapped my fingers once. Richard signaled the band leader, and the music cut dead, not fading, just gone, the drummer's stick frozen midair. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd ever heard in my life. Then the walkout began. A server carrying a tray of champagne flutes set it down on the nearest table and stepped back. Another laid down a tray of entrees mid-stride and untied her apron right there on the floor. At the bar, the bartender calmly capped the bottle he was pouring from, locked the liquor cabinet with a heavy click, and walked away without a word, ignoring Braden's confused shout of, "Hey, what are you doing?" Casey stood frozen near table 16, watching the staff she'd never once looked in the eye, quietly walking off the job in a single unified line. 30 of them, 40, gathering near the back of the room with the kind of stillness that comes from people who've finally been allowed to stop pretending. Braden ran toward his mother, useless and panicked. The wedding planner was already walking out with her clipboard tucked under her arm. I walked toward the front doors, and behind me I heard the even, steady footsteps of every single staff member in that building following me out, a quiet, dignified procession that said more than any speech I could have given. "Dad," Casey's voice cracked across the room, All the venom gone out of it, replaced by something closer to fear. Dad, what did you do? Tell them to come back. I didn't turn around. I walked through the lobby, past the confused valets already returning car keys to bewildered guests, and out into the warm Texas night toward my truck. The same one Casey had been embarrassed by all weekend, parked in the far corner of the lot under a row of crepe myrtles. Behind me, through the glass doors, I saw Richard reach the electrical panel at the back of the hall. Casey let out one sharp cry just as he pulled the master breaker down, and every light in that ballroom died at once. String lights, chandeliers, stage lights, all of it plunging 400 guests into total darkness. I climbed into my truck and let the engine turn over, that old familiar rattle settling into something steady under me. I didn't pull out of the lot right away. I sat in the shadows under those trees and watched the doors burst open. Watched men in rented tuxedos stumbling out using their phone flashlights. Watched women in formal dresses shivering in the parking lot with no valet to bring their cars around. Nobody out there was talking about how the bride looked anymore. My phone lit up on the passenger seat. Casey's name, over and over, ringing itself out to voicemail, then ringing again. I let it ring. 10 minutes later, a voicemail icon appeared, and I picked up the phone and played it through the speaker, wanting to hear exactly how far this had gone. Her voice came through ragged and panicked, guests shouting somewhere behind her. Dad, what the hell did you do? Everyone's leaving. Braden's mom is saying we have to comp half the guest list. You need to come back and fix this right now. Then Braden's voice, closer to the phone, cutting in cold and hard. Listen to me, old man. You think this is a joke? We had a verbal agreement for this venue. You can't just shut it down because your feelings got hurt. I'm calling a lawyer first thing tomorrow. You're going to pay for every dollar this cost us. The message ended, and I sat there in the dark and laughed, low and long, a laugh I hadn't felt move through me in years. Braden wanted to sue me for shutting down a venue I owned outright over a contract with my own name on the signature line. He had no idea he was threatening to drag the landlord into court over the landlord's own building. I drove home that night, showered, and slept 8 straight hours for the first time since Diane passed. A clear conscience does more for a man than any pill ever could. Morning came in soft and gold through my kitchen window, and I was halfway through my coffee when the pounding started on my front door, hard enough to rattle the frame. I didn't rush. I set my mug down, smoothed my flannel shirt, and opened the door to find Casey and Braden standing on my porch looking like they'd survived a shipwreck, her makeup smeared into gray hollows under her eyes, him in the same wrinkled shirt from the night before. What were you thinking? Braden shouted before I'd even gotten the door fully open. You destroyed everything. The venue's already sent us an invoice for $50,000 in damages. And Vanessa's uncle, Pam's attorney friend, says we've got a rock-solid case against you for breach of verbal agreement. $50,000, Walter. We are not leaving this porch until you write us a check. Casey stood beside him, arms crossed, eyes red-rimmed. You did this, Dad. You humiliated me in front of everyone who matters to me. You're going to fix it. I looked at the two of them a long moment, feeling one last flicker of something soft for the girl I'd raised, before the cold clarity of the last 2 days settled back over me like a coat. I'm not writing you a check, I said. I turned, walked to the small table in my entryway, and picked up a thick manila folder my attorney had dropped off the night before. I came back and held it out to Braden. That's the venue's master lease and service agreement. Turn to the last page. Read the signature block. Braden snatched the folder, flipping through it with shaking hands, Casey reading over his shoulder. When he reached the final page, I watched all the color drain out of his face at once. I don't understand, Casey whispered, staring at the name printed beneath the signature. Walter Pruitt, owner. Dad, that's you. I own the venue, Casey, I said. I own the catering company. I own the payroll of every single person who walked out of that room with me last night. I didn't just cover your deposit. I own the company that sent the invoice. Braden's hands were shaking so badly the papers rattled. The $50,000 penalty, he said, barely above a whisper, was issued on my order, I said. And you're absolutely right that it's owed. You're just confused about which direction the money flows. I'm not paying that penalty, Braden. I'm collecting it. From you. Within 30 days, since you told everyone at that wedding you paid for it yourself with your own money. Casey sank down onto the porch step, the folder sliding out of Braden's hands and scattering across the concrete. She looked up at the house she used to call depressing, at the same old truck in the driveway, and something in her face finally broke open into understanding. "We don't have $50,000, she said quietly. "We put the honeymoon on credit cards. If you do this, you'll bankrupt us." "Then I suggest you call that attorney back," I said, and stepped back inside, closing the door gently and turning the deadbolt with one clean click. I picked my coffee back up and stood at the kitchen window, watching Casey kneel on my walkway, gathering the scattered pages, watching her read that signature over and over like it might change if she stared long enough. It didn't change. Neither did I. 3 months later, Casey called from a number I didn't recognize. She was living in a smaller apartment across town, working retail again, paying down her share of the debt in installments through my attorney's office. She didn't ask for anything on that call. She just asked how I was doing, and for the first time in years, her voice sounded like the girl who used to fall asleep in the truck on the drive home from swim practice, the one who existed before the wedding, before Pamela, before any of it. I told her the truth. I told her I was doing fine. That afternoon, I sat on my porch with a set of blueprints spread across the table, weighed down at the corners with two smooth river stones. Diane Pruitt Trade Academy, the header read. A plan for a free vocational training center for young people, learning welding, plumbing, and diesel mechanics, the kind of honest trades that built the only life I ever really wanted. I traced the lines of the workshop wing with my finger and thought about my late wife, who never once cared about string lights or peonies, who cared only about people having something solid under their feet. I rocked slowly in my chair, in my old flannel shirt and scuffed boots, and understood that I didn't need a tailored jacket to prove I'd built something real. Respect was never something you could hand someone in an envelope, and it was never something you could demand from someone who hadn't earned it either. If there's one thing this whole ordeal taught me, it's that raising someone and spoiling someone are not the same act, no matter how much they can look alike from the inside. Sometimes the most loving thing a father can do is stop paying the bill and let his own child finally learn what things actually cost. If this story meant something to you, tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight, and if you believe love and money are two different currencies, hit subscribe before the next one starts.